The cane held the night's heat like a long breath, the stalks sweating sugar into the dawn as if the field itself labored beside her. Nadezh kept her blade low and her eyes lower, a practiced stillness that let her hear what others missed, the small splash behind the levee, the hush of wings over black water, the river's sleepy, dangerous turning. A white egret speared a fish and lifted off, drifting over the canal where cypress leaned like elders caught between prayer and warning. Farther out, beyond the levee, something heavy slid under the surface and didn't come up, the water closing over it without a ripple, as if the bayou swallowed secrets and asked for more. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The first bell clanged from the boiling house. Nadezh tucked the cane knife against her calf and rose, shoulder aching where yesterday's load had marked her. She moved with the field hands toward the yard, the scent of molasses sweet-sour in the damp air, the yard dogs picking their teeth on shadows. A small rectangle of paper lay half-buried at the edge of the path, rain-plastered, unreadable to most who passed it. She stepped on it, then stooped as if to adjust her sandal strap, pinching the paper up between two fingers and slipping it beneath her head wrap in the space she had sewn for hiding. Secrets rode there often. She didn't dare pull the paper out until the smokehouse's back corner, where the clay stayed cool and the soot hid breath. She turned her head so her own shadow covered her hands, slid free the damp slip, and smoothed it on her knee. The edges came away from the muddied center slowly, and letters breathed back into life. Tall, tidy ledger script, a date, an inventory column, a note about shipping delays at the dock. Her pulse picked up. The hand was Jules Delisses, the planter's son who fancied himself a gentleman merchant even while he measured human bodies like hogsheads. Delayed shipment meant Jules would linger, fretting, snapping. It meant the overseer, Hobart Pike, would pace like a struck match, and men would be sent to check the back channels to see whether the water was too low for a heavy keel. It meant, perhaps, that the plan Nadezh had not yet dared to name could begin to name itself. She folded the page back into its hiding seam and let the day claim her. They fed water to the cane and fire to the kettles. They fed sweat and song to the demanding, open mouth of the mill. Poems rose up inside Nadezh like steam, lines of numbers and moons and river turns, and she temped them into the place where her letters lived. She had learned in kitchens and storerooms, in the half-light of a devout mistress's discarded catechism, in the columns of shipments she was made to carry from desk to desk because her hands were steady and her eyes, though they pretended not to, could read. She had learned every thorny loop and spike, every sneaky S, until the ink of other people's power bent toward her. When the sun stood high, she let the heat crowd out her hunger and she watched the water. The canal that bit along the cane field's flank winked with dragonflies, the scum trembling in tiny circles where minnows worried it. A log bumped slow against the bank, then breathed. She knew the difference between wood and a living hide now, the way the bayou taught those who listened long enough. An old one, she thought, bigger than the bathtub in the big house, sliding along with the patience of something that remembered before people. Baptiste's step sounded behind her, the old man's ankle wrapped with frayed cloth. "You look like you're trying to count the water," he said, soft enough that the words didn't travel. "I am," she said, without turning, because to turn would be to notice, and to notice would be to invite notice back. "It talk if you learn the tongue." "It talk to you about tonight?" Baptiste asked. His breath carried coffee and burlap, the smell of the grain room where they had shifted sacks at dawn so mice wouldn't get bold, and so the inventory numbers would stay just crooked enough to feed the yard, not the ledger. "Not tonight," she said, though she thought of the damp paper warming against her scalp. "Soon." "Soon," he echoed, as if he were testing how it felt in his mouth. He reached down and lifted a scrap of palmetto frond, the fibers already splitting in long strands, and handed it to her. "For your hands. Keep 'em busy while you count." She took the frond. Busy hands soothed the heart and disguised thought. With her fingers, she split the palmetto into even threads, rolling them on her thigh, braiding without looking. Rope was rope, whether it came in a grand coil on a schooner or in a humble twist to tie up kindling. A good rope saved lives and took them, sometimes in the same morning. When the bell loosed them after dark, Nadezhda's feet took the path they had taken for months, then slipped off it when the pines began. The night in the bayou came down like a lid closing on a pot, shutting the world into a small, humid room that smelled of iron and orchids and old secrets. Cicadas rasped, frogs stitched the edges of the air together with sound. She walked with the careful confidence of one who had taught herself each route by feel, who stepped between the cypress knees as if they were elders she respected but did not fear. At the hollow of a blown-down tree, she knelt and lifted the board Baptiste had set there long ago, the one that looked like nothing but hid their few treasures. A handline, carefully wrapped in oilcloth, a hook hammered from a bent nail, a coil of the palmetto rope she had finished 2 days ago, its twist firm and smooth. She added tonight's braid to the coil, then set the oilcloth back over the lot and replaced the board. If a snake had coiled there, she would have greeted it and moved on. The snakes, like the water, had their work. She pushed on to the back of the shed where Clara smoked fish. The cook's arms were dusted with salt. Her eyes were the sharp kind that cut truths to necessary shapes. "You're late," Clara said without heat, pulling a strip of hung fish down and laying it over a low flame to soften. "I had to listen to the water," Nadezh said. "It sing you something new?" It hummed soon. Nadezh took the fish and ate it slow so her stomach wouldn't argue later. "Jules' shipment's delayed. Might be tides. Might be the keel too heavy for the channel. He's likely to go look for himself." "The fool thinks the bayou is a street if he's holding the reins," Clara said, without heat. "Hobart'll go with him." Her mouth tightened as she said the overseer's name. "He likes to count people with his eyes, and count again with his whip if the first number don't please him." "Then he can learn a different math," Nadezh said, a heat blooming low in her chest, steady as coals. "I need Noemi tonight, and Toussaint if he's not coughing." "Noemi's cutting sacks in the quarter. She'll meet you by the old pirogue. Toussaint got a rattle, but he swears he's air and not a man, and air don't cough. I told him air can drown same as anything." Nadezh nodded. "I'll take him if he can stand." She wiped her fingers on a strip of cloth and let herself think of what they had whispered for weeks, never saying the shape of it, only the edges. The masters fed themselves fat on sweetness, while the bayou watched with a mouthful of teeth. Perhaps there was a way to turn their hunger to meet another. She found Noemi where the old pirogue rotted into the bank, its sides soft as bread. The younger woman crouched with her back to the cypress, braiding strips of sack into a band. "To sling the oil," Noemi said, before Nadezh asked, "the thin kind that floats." "You're thinking like water," Nadezh said. "I'm thinking like you." And her smile flashed quick. "Clara say you need Toussaint too." His eyes see in the dark. He can hear a boat by the way the frogs shut up. From the shadow by the cypress knee, a boy's voice spoke low, its edges softened by the rattle in his chest. "I can hear you now, and I hear the old gator on the mudbank. He's got a song. He sing when the little ones sleep." He slipped out of the cut grass, thin as a willow switch, face shiny with fever but eyes bright. "You got a plan yet?" "Plans," Nadezh said. "Not one. Threads that twist into rope. You'll hold one end, Baptiste will hold another, Clara too. We don't pull until the rope is tight and all hands are sure. Then we pull together." Toussaint nodded like an old man. "I can be air, but I can be rope too." He coughed, turned his face to his sleeve, and wrote it out quietly. They sank into the night's work. Nadege taught by touch, by the way she guided hands onto knots, by the way she set a rhythm with breath. She showed Noemi how to tie the palmetto rope into loops that would slip only when a body leaned wrong, how to weight a cord with a small bag of sand so it would fall just so into black water, how to smear the thin oil on the inside of a boat so shoes would lose their grip. They spoke no names of targets, only places: the bend where the cypress knees made a second shoreline, the snag of roots that held like fingers, the narrow run between the cane-field canal and the true bayou where the current made a quiet like prayer. When her hands trembled, she pressed them flat to the earth. Fear had its own music, but she could tune it. She closed her eyes and saw letters, the tight loops of Jules' hand, the columns of sums. She saw the catechism's small black type, the layout of questions and answers as strict as a river's banks. Who made you? God made me. Why did God make me? To know Him, love Him, and serve Him. She had not been given answers for her own life, but she had been given the shape that held answers, and she was fitting her own into it. Before dawn pressed the dark thinner, she walked to the big house with a tray and a face box empty. Inside, the air cooled her skin and pricked it with pride of fine things. Madame de Lisle sat with her fan and her Bible. Her fingers were white as boiled corn, her nails perfect scallops. "The silver needs scouring," Madame said, without looking up. "We have callers if the shipment is further delayed." "As you say," Nadege answered, placing the coffee and stepping back. She let herself see the hall table's drawer where Jules kept his account book. She let herself breathe the wax odor of the seal he used. She let herself see and not look as the maid from the house staff dusted the mantelpiece with nervous small strokes and glanced at her for a cue she could not give. To look, to command, to choose, those were the outer privileges. To see without appearing to, that was the privilege Nadege had won for herself. In the hall, a churned, muddy print showed where a boot had come in wet from the levee. Hobart Pike's voice followed it, carrying resentment like a drunk carries his liquor, sloppy and unavoidable. "Water's low. You can drag a keel through the main channel, but she'll fight you. Told that boy downriver last week he'd crack his plank if he weren't careful."
Jules's answer had the smug lilt Nadege recognized from ledger notes on successful sales. "I can read a tide chart," he said. "I can read a sky," Hobart snapped, and spat a black strand of tobacco into a spittoon. "Sky says the river's stingy today. You want to look, we'll look, but I'll say it now. If a hull drags bottom, I ain't hauling it alone." Nadege smoothed the edge of the tray and made her breath part of the room where it could not be heard. The Ripper was stingy. That had been true last night, too, when she and Noemi had measured a rope against a cypress and felt the current comb its fibers. She moved back to the kitchen and kept moving. Work disguised thought. By noon, word had quickened from mouth to mouth without appearing to move at all. Jules would take a small skiff and Hobart a second. They would go out just before sunset to test the bends. Perhaps Jules would satisfy himself that the barge should wait until morning. Perhaps he would require some other action. Either way, the water would answer him. Clara put her hand over Nadege's wrist when she came for the fish basket. "This is a narrow bridge you're building," she murmured, "and the drop on either side is full of teeth." "My feet know it," she said. "So do my hands, but the bridge is still ours to choose." Young Isaiah, whose mother worked in the laundry and whose father had been sold last spring, drifted near like a leaf. He watched Nadege with eyes that wanted to be older than the rest of him. "Can I carry the basket to the quarter?" he asked. "My hands are sure." "Your hands can be sure on this," she said, and gave him the lighter basket. "Walk with it like it's got a secret to deliver." He lifted his chin and practiced walking with dignity so fierce and new it pricked tears at the back of her nose. She looked away so he wouldn't see. The sun began to pour itself out over the cane tops, thick and slow. Nadezh slipped away when shadows lengthened like thrown ropes. She wore a cotton dress the color of mud and a head wrap nothing would notice. Around her waist, under the cloth, the palmetto rope lay coiled, ready. In her palm, the small oil vial warmed to her skin. At the back channel, Baptiste stood with his shoulders set, his face softening when he saw her. "Toussaint's already out there," he said. He went like a ghost in the grass. "Noémie?" he said. "At the knee snag, she has the sand weights." His eyes flicked over Nadezh's face. "You ready?" She let the question sink until it touched truth. Fear and readiness lived in the same room. She opened the door to both. "Yes," she said. They moved like a thought shared among bodies. Nadezh placed the first loop where the cypress knee made a rounded lip, just above the waterline, fingers steady in the gummy bark. The rope looked casual, like a forgotten thing. She weighted the end with the sandbag and let it trail into the black. She painted the barest breath of oil along the inside curb of the small skiff that waited for Jules, where a boot would step when a man reached for balance. Noémie's low whistle came and went, the pattern that meant clear. Toussaint's signal, a frog's call answered, then not, meant Jules's boots had left the porch. Hobart's laugh, carrying down the levee like a dog bark, meant the overseer had a bottle his hand loved more than his head. The bayou's breath drew in as they set themselves into the lilies, crouched, stilled. Jules's voice came first. He complained about mosquitoes, swore at a knot in the rope, called for a lantern, then changed his mind because the light drew flies. He stepped like a man who believes the ground waits to be ground. Hobart's step was heavier, a stamp that dared the earth to answer. Nadezh felt the water register their weight. The old gator's song stopped. The frogs wrote a line of silence into the air. She lay her palm on the cypress trunk and borrowed its patience. She did not think of the word alligator, even as it rose like a shadow in her mind. She thought of the channel, the knee, the slip of oil, the loop that would wait like a lullaby until the wrong leg leaned the wrong way. They went past me, close enough that I could smell the sour on Hobart's breath. The skiffs bumped, slid, bumped again. Jules cursed and threw a rope in the wrong direction. Hobart corrected him with a snap of voice that sounded like leather. "Don't pull," Baptiste breathed, a shape of air, not a word. The rope lay easy in Nadezh's hand. She could feel the river through it, the way tension traveled along palmetto strands with a whispering honesty. She knew with a sailor's certainty that they would not even need to pull if the wrong moment met the right mistake. The first mistake came cheap. Jules, stepping to pry the skiff off a root, grabbed the gunwale where the thin oil had made a mirror. His boots slid. His knee knocked the lantern loose in the bottom of the boat. The lantern did not light. It bumped and sulked. He swore and laughed a little embarrassed, and Hobart snorted. The skiff slid on. Nadezh's lungs forgot how to breathe for a beat, then remembered. In her head, the catechism's cadence answered a question it had never intended. Why were you made? She fixed the answer. To know the river, love it, and serve it, yes, but also to live free under the same sky that made the river wide. That thought steadied her.
They reached the narrow run between the field canal and the truer bayou, and everything in the night drew itself closer, the way bodies lean forward to listen. Noémie's sand-weighted lines lay exactly where the current would tidy them up against the boat's path. The cypress knees crowded in like teeth in a smile that wasn't kind or unkind. It simply was. Jules stood to push off. The loop found his ankle, an embrace as light as string. He didn't feel it until the boat drifted and he shifted his weight in quick correction, the way a man who has always been caught expects to be caught again. The line tightened without anyone pulling it. His boot slid to answer the betrayal of oil. He reached for the gunwale. The boat twisted like a surprised animal. The old gator's song did not come back. The water said nothing at all. "Easy," Hobart barked, which was a prayer in his mouth. He braced wide, his own balance not what drink had promised it was. The second loop kissed his calf and waited. Nadezh's fingers didn't move. She watched, not as a judge, but as a river witness. She counted breaths the way she had counted water, and the rope told her the story of weight and mistake and the way a body belonged too much to gravity once a certain angle was lost. "Hold," Baptiste's air-shaped voice said again, not a command, a keeping. The word lived in her hand. She obeyed it. Jules's oar smacked water and found nothing to push. The skiff knocked the knee snag with a dull thud. He pinwheeled, and his boot landed exactly where the oil had waited for it. There are moments when a life tells the truth about itself without words. Nadezh saw one pass across Jules's face, something like surprise that the world could tip him the way he had tipped it so many times before. She did not move. She did not cheer. She let the rope and the night and the water all do the work they knew. A breath behind her, Isaiah's mother stifled a gasp with the back of her hand. Nadezh had not known she had come. She would have stopped her. Now she could only be still and let the night keep its shape. The skiffs turned the corner into the blacker mouth of the channel. The frogs flattened their song to a thin line, then lifted it again somewhere else, as if the music wanted distance. Nadezh felt the rope hum, a low, pure note, and her palms sweated against the fiber. There was always a chance that the water would be kind to fools tonight, that it would hold them up and send them home with a story about how they had bested it. There was always a chance that the world would be exactly as it had been. She thought of the ledger paper against her scalp. She thought of Isaiah practicing dignity. She thought of Baptiste's ankle and Clara's hands and the catechism's tight answers that held no soft places for a life like hers. She looked down at the small vial in her palm and, with a steady thumb, pushed the last measure of oil onto the line where Hobart's boot must step to shove the boat free one more time. Now,
This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Now, the rope sang in Nadezh's hands so softly she might have mistaken it for her own blood if the cypress hadn't hummed the same note. She did not pull. She did not even breathe with ambition, only with care. Jules's weight shifted again. Hobart grunted and leaned to shove the skiff free. The boat's slick curve answered in treachery he could not imagine. He caught himself once, twice, boots skating to new stances that promised steadiness and delivered less than that. The second loop kissed higher on his calf. "Don't move," Nadezh whispered to herself, which was the same as praying. The bayou took the prayer and kept it. Hobart's foot slid. The oar he shoved with found no bottom where he expected one and too much where he didn't. The skiff's nose turned, swinging him wide. His hands grabbed for a balance that belonged to other nights and other bottles. His heel met oil again. He cursed, a word with too many teeth and not enough sense. The rope tightened without ceremony. He toppled with a splash that sounded like a sack falling into grain. No one moved. Not Nadezh, not Baptiste, steady as old wood. Not Noemi, a shadow taut as a bowstring. The water closed over Hobart, and the frogs wrote silence across their own throats, a black ribbon binding the night. For a breath, nothing else happened at all. Then the skiff rocked when Jules lunged to grab the overseer's sleeve and caught only a fistful of wet air. "Hold," Baptiste-shaped breath said again, though no one needed reminding now. They knew the rule. The water had its own court and did not like witnesses who interfered once the sentence started. Jules knelt and reached, and leaned farther than reason, as if the habit of being saved might conjure a saving hand out of darkness. His fingers clawed at water. The loop that had drunk his ankle flexed, took on the shape of a command, and the skiff jerked another inch sideways. He clutched the gunwale and hauled himself back, panting, the sound sharp and thin. Hobart did not come up where a man might expect a man to come up. The surface sighed, a breath in reverse. Something large turned below, slow as time. Jules swore with fury that was noise and not plan, then sat hard, the skiff slapping bottom in a place that hadn't had bottom a heartbeat before. He spat toward the dark, turned the boat with rough strokes, and made for the levee, his curses ringing out over the knee-high teeth of Cyprus. Nadege waited until the frogs found their song again. Only then did she ease breath back into her ribs. Her hands loosened around the rope as if they were letting go of a hot brand. She did not speak. She and her people took the lines up, lifted the sandbags, unkissed the loops from bark and water and memory, and made the bayou look like itself again. The night tidied away what it could not change. When she could stand, she moved without hurry through the grass to where the quarter shadows gathered in a hush that was not curiosity and not fear, but something in between. A respect learned from storms and births and the small hours when someone's breath stopped because breath stops sometimes. Isaiah's mother gripped her own elbows so hard her fingers left crescents. Clara slid out from the smokehouse side as if the wall itself were giving her up. Toussaint leaned against a knee of Cypress and coughed into the crook of his arm until the fit passed, his eyes on Nadege, steady in the way that made him seem older than he was. "Home," Nadege said, and they went one by one with the slow, deliberate pace of people returning from a prayer they would not speak about in the morning.
She did not sleep. She lay with her eyes on the roofline and counted breaths until counting turned into the catechism shape. Question, answer. Question, answer. Who made the water? The same sky that made me. What does the water want? To keep its own counsel and carry what it will. What do I want? To live. To make a space wide enough for others to live too. The answers held. She rose before the first bell because the house would be awake early now that the bayou had taken a thing the house believed it owned. By dawn, men with lanterns and sticks combed the bank where Hobart had last been seen, which was not the same place at all as where he had last been. Water moved. It stored its secrets in motion and shade and old logs that breathed. Baptiste walked the levee with the others who were told to walk the levee. The yard dog whined at the edge and would not be pushed into the shallows. Jules's face had the color of old parchment, his mouth set hard around shame and rage he could not separate. "Hold your eyes down," Clara said under her breath, passing Nadege a bin of bowls, "and your heart up." "I can hold both," Nadege said, and did. Madame Delille's fan moved faster than usual, her Bible open on a page that rattled in a draft that didn't exist. "He'll be found," she said to the air, and the air did not answer her. Her rings made small tapping sounds against the chair's carved arm, as if she were knocking on a door only she could see. "He surely tangled himself in roots and is waiting. Hobart is a practical man." Practical was a word for a man who counted other people like sacks and expected the numbers to stay where he left them. Nadege poured coffee and set it down with the gentleness she saved for small bodies and grief. On the hall table, the account book lay open. The page's left column recorded the day's tasks and payables to suppliers. The right-hand margin held a half-finished list of what would go out with the delayed shipment once the channel allowed it. She read each line without seeming to. Lard, cane syrup, tobacco leaf, and another word quivered near the edge like a thing not fully written. Names. Names were never written where people could see them. They lived in the planter's head and in far-off places where bills of sale traveled like weather. But Jules's hand had started a letter there, N, and then another letter, A, before stopping, as if he had meant to remind himself of a transaction and thought better of it when a boot scraped on the porch. She folded the knowledge into the seam in her head wrap where the damp page had once warmed. She washed kettles. She sent Isaiah to the well with a pail and watched his shoulders square under the handle's weight. She spoke to Baptiste without moving her lips when he came to the back step to ask for a length of cord for the yard's gate.
"Tonight, not the water, not yet." He nodded a nod no one would have noticed if they were looking. "Rope can be road or river. It just lie there until somebody decide which." Toward noon, a shout went up from the far bend, the kind of shout that carries to anyone who ever ran to a shout to find what had been found. Bodies moved like a wind had caught them. Nadezh did not run. She moved with the line of bowls. She stacked, wiped, stacked. She let the story come to her the way ripe things drop. The story came, as it always did, in pieces with edges that cut. A man had found Hobart's hat while pushing at the hyacinth mat with a pole, the hat floating like a lie. Further along, they'd brought up a length of torn shirt from a root tangle. A gator slid under the water's skin like a word swallowed because it would make trouble to speak it. Nothing else. Jules took a bottle to his room and did not come out until the sun had run most of its course. When he did, he demanded the skiff be readied again. "We drag the channel. If he's caught, we bring him up and lay him on his back, and I'll look at his face, and I'll know. If the water kept him, we'll know that too." His voice made a threat against a thing that could not be threatened. "You'll take someone knows the roots," Madame said faintly from the settee, as if she had tossed a suggestion into a well to see if it made a splash. "Baptiste, perhaps the old has uses." "No," Jules said, too quick. He did not want witnesses whose eyes saw more than he could control. "I'll take the boy with the ears for frogs." His eyes cut toward the quarters, toward Toussaint, whose cough had quieted in the heat and who had been using that quiet to listen better than anyone knew. Nadezh's throat closed. "He's a child," she said before her mind could stop her mouth, and she felt the danger of it the way one feels a misstep on a ladder.
Jules laughed without humor. "Then he will do what children do and hold a lantern," he said. "Bring him." Toussaint came because a command can snatch a body faster than a parent can catch its sleeve. He touched Nadezh's finger as he passed, the way a drowning man might touch a rope to remind himself what it feels like to be held. She pressed her fingertip back against his with a pressure that said, "Wait," where words could not go. She slipped a small twist of palmetto fiber into his palm as if it were nothing but something to fidget with. His eyes said he understood. They went out in the last light, hunger and fear riding in the skiff like the 2 extra men Jules did not count. Nadezh could not follow with her body. She followed with her breath from the levee's shadow, moving along the bank with the steady pace of a woman who, if asked, could say she was gathering fallen sticks. Baptiste walked ahead of her. Noémie ghosted behind. They kept distance enough to be 1 thing if seen and 3 if not. From the black water, lantern light made a blurry coin. The skiff bumped and scraped along newts the way grief bumps and scrapes along memory. Jules jabbed at shadows. Toussaint held the lantern so carefully that the flame never wavered. Once he coughed, and Jules snapped at him, and then, surprised at himself, slapped the boy back to silence with a quick, embarrassed hand, as if anyone might see and judge him for a thing his life had trained him to do without thought. In the place where the old gator liked to float at dusk, the skiff's bottom found a log and rode it for a breath, a seesaw of light and dark. The log breathed. Toussaint's eyes widened, the lantern flame jumped, Jules swore and stabbed with his pole, which the old one took as a conversation starter. The water eased aside, then closed in, thick as syrup and twice as deceptive. There was a flurry that was more sound than sight. Nadezh's fingers dug crescents into her own skin and did not let herself think in nouns. She let verbs carry the night. Slide, turn, take, keep. When the flurry stilled, the skiff still floated. Jules was still in it. Toussaint was too. white-lipped, the lantern bruising the night with a fatigue that looked like mercy compared to other lights she had seen men carry. The old one sank, and the water smoothed itself like a face after a spasm. Jules's breathing ran hard for a minute, then steadied into something like a decision. "We'll call him gone," he said aloud, to no one and to everyone who would hear him tomorrow when he told the story with a straight back. "We'll tell the parish, and they'll nod and say the river takes what it takes." He sat, tired as a man after a beating he didn't deserve, though he had given it to himself with every choice that brought him to that moment. "And we'll work." They worked. The days after ate themselves. Work filled them and emptied them and filled them again. Hobart's absence made a hole the size of a whip shadow. Jules took up the counting with a kind of brittle precision. The lash did not crack across backs as many times. He was not practiced at it the way Hobart was, but he held other tools. Hunger, threat, the promise of being sold downriver. Those phrases that turn the sky into a lid. Nadege held a different tool. She carried the memory of the slippery letter N written in the margin where names had no business being. She watched the mailboat. She learned the roots of men who carried folded paper like fine knives. And in the storehouse back corner, on sackcloth stretched tight as parchment, she began to teach Noemi how to copy hands. You don't shape a letter like your own. You shape it like you're wearing a coat that ain't yours. You can walk in it, but you feel where it pulls different under the arm. She made the tall, thin lines of Jules's habit, the way his R's leaned forward as if they were about to run. The H he sometimes forgot to cross, and sometimes crossed twice as if to make up for the forgetting. Noemi's tongue pushed against her teeth in concentration. Her first R looked like a fishhook. Her second, better. By the fifth, it was a man's R who thought himself careful. They used those borrowed letters with strict economy. One note that said the barge would delay a day more than expected, so the overseer would not be replaced this week by a cousin with a meaner smile. Another to the parish clerk, folded inside a bundle of invoices that recorded a transaction as complete which had never taken place. 6 barrels of lard to a plantation upriver, credited and done. So that when a real clerk came asking about real lard, he would be sent looking in a direction that wasn't toward the quarter's small store of food. Each stroke of ink was a step on a bridge over teeth. At night, the bayou came up into the yard in her mind and sat beside her like family. She listened to it as if it might confess more than it already had. It did not. It held what it held. She respected that. She did not ask it to do again what it had done. Not yet. One taking turned the house's bones unsteady. Another would make them notice the floor beneath their feet. Then a man came from Opelousas with a coat too tight in the shoulders and a laugh that his mouth made without his eyes. "You need a hand over your people," he told Jules, who bristled at the implication that anything of his needed hands not his own. "For a fee, I can call men who make fields stand up and march."
"We are not a military," Jules said, but his fingers tapped the desk as if they wanted a whip to borrow. "You are if you want to keep profit," the man said. He let Jules see the handle of a pistol and a paper that said deputy and a stamp that made poor men's bodies know their place. Nadege watched the letterhead out of the corner of her eye and made a copy of its look in her mind she could reproduce later, like a woman reproduces a song after hearing it once. Men did come. 2 from downriver who spoke more about dogs than they did about wages. 1 from town who had a deputy's badge and a story about having caught a man last year with his freedom in his pocket like a stolen peach, and a boy with a grin he had not yet decided how to use.
They brought a stink of swagger and cheap whiskey and the kind of cruelty that wants to show itself like a rooster. The quarter learned to go still at their passing, a stillness that was not submission but camouflage. Even Isaiah could do it now, his face a smooth pond surface under which fish darted and plotted. Toussaint disappeared into shadows during the day and took to the water at night, oaring like a whisper between knees and lily pads, reporting the men's habits the way birds report weather by the angles they choose. Tonight they take the bay horse down to the bend and drink until the world tell him it's funny, he told Nabash one dusk, masking his cough with a rag that Clara had soaked in pine tea. They throw bottles at the old cypress. One of them keep missing and laughing like it's a prayer. Leave them to the night, Nadej said. She wanted to let the water finish lessons for every man who brought teeth into her people's sleep. But teeth were not only in water. They were in paper and stamps and words shouted under color of law. She needed another strategy. She found it in the margin again. Names. The end that Jules had begun and not finished now multiplied. In the next week, the letter reappeared twice, choked off both times. Once, it became N.A. before a blot swallowed it. Another time, N.E.G. before a blot again. He had been about to write Negro, then stopped, aware in some part of himself that a certain record could later be read by eyes beyond his control. He kept the human ledger in his head. She would make it walk onto paper. On a day when the sun stuck to skin like spilled molasses, Nadej brought Jules his coffee and set it beside his book with the careful turn of wrist that made careless men trust her proximity. He looked at the window instead of her and grunted for sugar. She set the sugar down, then knocked the tin off the desk with a motion so slight it could have been the fault of a warped plank. Jules cussed at the floor and stooped to scoop the mess. In that stoop, she slid her own paper under the open page, paper she had copied from scraps of invoices, paper that wore the parish clerk's letterhead in lines so perfect she had shocked herself when she finished it. On that letterhead, in Jules' own hand as she had learned to wear it, were 3 lines that would matter. Transfer of property. Baptiste, age approximate 63. Isaiah with mother. Boy, 9. Noemi, woman, 22. Transfer to plantation of E. Thibodeau, upriver. Reason, settlement of debt, ledger disparity from shipment delays. She did not sign it. She left the bottom blank, knowing that a blank can be an invitation a certain kind of man cannot resist. She turned to go, made to leave, then paused and looked unlooking at the paper as if it were dirt on the floor, as if she wished she knew how to read and clean it up. Jules followed her almost look, and, because human eyes chase other eyes, his eyes fell on the sheet. He read. His lips pursed. Pride flared, the pride of a man who sees his handwriting as proof of his mind. He lifted the pen without seeming to think and signed his name in a flourish that would stand in any court in the parish. He sanded the ink with a practiced flick and set the page aside to dry while complaining out loud about the cost of sugar as if sugar were a person who might be insulted into lowering its price. She picked the page up the way a servant picks up a used glass and took it away to the place under the kitchen floorboards where Clara kept a crock of lard and other necessities. Later, when Isaiah ran messages into town, he carried that folded page under his shirt like a secret he could barely stand to keep. And he put it into the hands of a man Nadej had watched for months, a free black carpenter who wore respectability the way some men wore a jacket in heat. He nodded once and did not ask a question. In his shop's back room, under the sound of playing on wood, he put the paper into another envelope addressed to the parish office. Stamps did what they always did, made lies into rules.
3 days later, the deputy came to the big house, hat in hand, letter between his fingers, the stamp winking in lopsided authority.
"We'll take custody for transfer tomorrow," he said in a voice that had learned how to sound official. Jules waved him into the study, surprised and pleased at how efficiently the world confirmed itself. That night, Baptiste sat on the step of his cabin and looked at the space between his bare feet like there was a map there. "This your plan?" he asked without accusation. "It's a door," Nadege said. Her voice shook, and she didn't hide it. "We step through and then close it behind us. Thibaudot is an old man with a bad heart. He will not look hard. From his place, there's a way to the back bay where the river forgets to watch." "And what you put on the other side of a door?" Claire asked, leaning in the frame, her cheeks shining with kitchen heat. "What you put there for those who can't walk fast?" "Boats," Nadege said. "Two, hidden where the knees make a blind alley. Food and oilcloth. A rope tied off to the white stone under the water so you can find it with your feet. Baptiste, you lead the first. I'll bring the second." "And Jules?" Noemi asked. The name fell like a stone into a jar, the sound measured. "He will follow. He will send dogs. He will send law." Nadege felt the shape of the decision gather itself. "He will follow," she agreed. "So we will lead him onto a bend the water favors." It was not an execution she planned. She would not call it that in her head. It was not even a trap. It was a lesson already begun that would be allowed to finish if the pupil insisted on staying after school. The morning came, wrapped in cotton sky. The deputy set his shoulders at official angles. Jules wore his best hat. Baptiste, Isaiah, and Noemi stood by with the quiet of furniture in a room. The paper said they were going upriver to a new owner. The paper had stamps. Stamps make a road, even where there is swamp. They set out together on a wagon that smelled of wet wood and old corn. Nadege watched from the quarters, her hands busy with a seam that did not need stitching. When the wagon passed the stand of cypress that hid the back path, Toussaint's cough sounded once, bird-like, deliberate. Nadege rose, moved. Clara slid out behind her with a bundle that clinked soft. Cups, a tin of bacon fat, dry biscuits wrapped tight. Noemi looked back once, deliberately, eyes on Nadege like a line cast between them. At the parish road, before the turn to Thibaudot's place, the wagon creaked a complaint and the right rear wheel made a sound that said it had something to say whether anyone wanted to hear it or not. The deputy swore, climbed down, and kicked the spoke like a man who hopes violence can fix things. The pin popped. Wheels behave like bodies sometimes. Once a joint gives, all parts tell each other the news. The wagon sagged to a halt. "We'll take walk the rest," he said more to his badge than to his legs. He pointed with his chin toward the bayou path that would make the route shorter. Jules calculated the distance in his head and didn't want to appear inconvenienced, so he agreed. Baptiste shifted the rope that bound his wrists and let it cut enough to leave marks later but not enough to slow his stride. Isaiah kept his chin level. Noemi matched her breath to Nadege's imagined pace as if they were already walking together toward the white stone under the water. The bayou path narrowed, and then narrowed again. The deputy's throat worked, unhappy to be in a place that didn't take his badge seriously. Jules tried to keep his hat out of spider silk and ended up wearing it anyway, the gossamer drawing pale lines over the black felt like an old woman's hair. He swatted at it and then at a mosquito, and the motion made him feel foolish, and feeling foolish made him push ahead faster. At the bend, where knees crowded like spectators and hyacinth made its false green floor, Baptiste stumbled just enough to make the deputy grab for him, and that grabbing gave Noemi the breath to make her rope do what ropes can do when they're held by a person who knows they are for more than binding. In a flick of wrist and a step that was a dance, she slid the loop down and up and over the deputy's clever hand, and the two of them were knitted for a heartbeat in a figure that looked almost like affection, until she twisted her shoulders and left him embracing only himself. He swore and let go and grabbed again, but Baptiste had his balance back.
which is another way to say his breath. Out of the brush, a skiff nosed in, Nadege and Toussaint in it. Clara pushed it with a pole, her face set in a patience that could cure the sick, if patience cured anything but time. "Get in," Nadege said, low. "Now." They moved like a thought. Isaiah first, small enough to tuck into the bow. Noemi next. Baptiste last, his rope slashed clean by a blade that had spent years peeling sugarcane and new muscle from fiber. The deputy reached too late and caught only air, which is nothing until a man realizes how much he relies on air. Jules shouted, the sound splitting into anger and fear as it left his mouth. "Stop!" he yelled, as if that word could stiffen water. "By law." "Law don't float here," Clara said, which was not defiance, it was weather. They pushed off. The skiff slid into the green corridor between knees. The deputy floundered along the bank for a few yards, then lost heart where the mud sucked at his boots and the roots frowned him away. But Jules took the second skiff that had been stashed for that possibility. Nadege's contingency turned against itself and shoved into the channel with strokes that had more rage than shape. The boy with the grin trailed behind, with the pistol tucked stupidly in his belt. He shouted to no effect and decided his best contribution was to run back to the parish road for the wagon he couldn't fix. The two downriver men laughed until they realized no one was laughing with them, and then they too discovered they had somewhere else to be.
The chase became quiet, the kind of quiet a story uses when it wants to make an argument without words. Nadege set a pace that looked slow and wasn't. She counted on the bends she had named in her own body. Toussaint, pale and thin but determined, watched the edges of the water for the old one and the young ones and the ones whose eyes rose like periscopes when they wanted to be counted. The skiff behind them sent impatient eddies up against the knees. Jules' breath sawed in a way that made the air tired to carry him. "Left at the lily break," Nadege murmured to Baptiste, who had taken the poles so she could rest her hands for the last work of the day. "Then the white stone. Feel for it with your foot. Tie off when you find it." "I know that stone," he said softly. "It been waiting all my life." They reached the open mouth of a little bay where the sky printed itself on the water like a repeated dream. The white stone lay 5 inches under the surface, a ghost of itself. Baptiste looped the rope, tied a knot that a boy could untie in the dark, and settled back to look like he was resting when he was really waiting. Jules, behind, made the bend a beat too fast. The small skiff doesn't like a heavy hand. It pitches its tantrums in ways that don't look like tantrums until you're in the middle of them. He corrected with a stroke that kept him upright and pushed him exactly where he did not want to go, toward the shoal where shallow water disguised itself as pathway. His boat scraped. He swore. He leaped to push off, and his boot found hyacinth that promised ground and offered only water's humor. He pinwheeled, arms windmilling into a man who, in other rooms, would have caught a chandelier and laughed. Nadege met his eyes then because she wanted to know, wanted to be sure of something she could not name. She saw not a monster and not a boy. She saw a man made of habits he mistook for bones. He did not know how to float on water he couldn't command. He did not know how to see people who refused to be furniture. His surprise was a small, honest thing. She did not help him. She did not hurt him. She let the water, which had a longer memory than either of them, finish its sentence if it must. He flailed himself back into the skiff, which bucked again and accepted him grudgingly because some things are predictable even in their indignity. He came on, slower now, careful and furious in equal portions. "You won't get far," he called, the voice of a man whose world has always been as far as his word. Baptiste snarled without showing teeth. "Far as a place inside a man first," he said under his breath, and Nadege felt the truth of it in the way her chest widened to make more room for air. The white stone held them. When Jules reached the bay, he hesitated at the sight of open sky reflected so perfectly that a man who didn't know it would think the world stopped there. He tested the water with his oar, suspicious of beauty. He cut left, then right, then cursed at the hyacinth mat that had blown into a new shape while he was fighting his boat. He was strong, and strength is a kind of intelligence when the world is kind to it. The world was not kind in this place. "Back channel," Toussaint breathed, pointing without pointing toward a gap invisible unless you knew the angle of two cypress shadows at this hour. Baptiste nudged the bow a hair. The skiff entered that gap and became mostly shadow. Jules saw shadow and not path. He lunged for the direct route and found a tangle of knees that had no interest in explaining themselves. "Don't look back," Nadege said to Isaiah, whose neck strained to know whether the story had a new shape. She was speaking to herself as much as to him. They went. The back channel braided into itself, then unbraided where the current had worked all last spring, chewing a new throat through the marsh. They passed the white stone's cousin, a brown one, and then the place where the river forgot which bank it had promised itself it would keep. The channel opened, and the night came on like an agreement. Only then did Nadege let her mind turn to the second skiff still behind, to Jules' breath, to the way his anger would sour if given back to itself without an audience. Men like that needed witnesses. The bayou did not care to watch. It forced him to be his own witness, which is a punishment and sometimes a mercy. They reached the blind alley where she had hidden the second boat days ago for this very use. She shifted Isaiah into that skiff with a squeeze to his shoulder that said more than her mouth could. She told him, "You go with Clara. Slow, quiet. If you hear a splash, you hear nothing. If you hear my name, you don't know me except in your heart." "I know you there," he said, and something old in him looked out of his young face. "I won't let you fall out."
"I won't fall," she said, making a promise she could almost keep. She stayed with Baptiste and Noémie in Toussaint. They let Clara's boat slip away first, then pushed theirs into the seam between two leaning cypresses where moths wrote their cursive. They waited until the sound of the deputies cussing on the distant path dribbled into nothing, and the bayou's breath stood steady again. When they pushed on, the stars were in the water and the water was in the trees. And Nadege could not tell which way was up if she looked farther than the next oar's length. So she didn't look farther. She rode the next thing and the next. Toward dawn, the water's quality changed, the taste of it in the air, the way it handled the boat. "We're close," Baptiste said, quiet with relief and caution. "The back bay, the place where the river forget to count." It was a place of maroons, though no one said that word out loud. Families with names no longer on any page had made houses in the green, their roofs stitched into the swamp's refusal. Smoke went straight up from one cook fire, as if it too didn't want to be caught. A woman with a baby on one hip and a machete on the other stepped out into the low light and looked at them for a long breath, and then another, and then made a small gesture with her chin that meant welcome, in a language older than stamps. They came in like people arriving too late to a vigil and too early to a feast. The air smelled of fish and wood smoke and camphor. The ground underfoot was springy with old leaf. Isaiah's feet made no sound, and then made the sound of a boy who had decided to exist again. Clara's laugh came out of her like a cough she'd been holding back for years. Toussaint coughed for real, and then drank water and coughed less. Noémie sat on a log and put her head in her hands a moment, and then lifted it, eyes new-made. Nadege did not settle. She stood and let the place settle around her. She knew enough not to take a seat in the house not hers. The machete woman came and set a bowl of fish down near her ankles without fuss. "You from down Delille's place," she said, which was not a question. "We were," Nadege said. "We are here now." "You bring trouble," the woman said, not unkindly. "Trouble makes noise, and noise makes dogs." "We bring dogs," Nadege agreed, "and we bring eyes that have learned to see on your behalf if you'll have them." She looked toward the channel they had come through, as if her gaze could be a net. "She bring hands for roofs, and for poles, and for letters."
At the word letters, the woman's eyebrow altered. "You read," she said. "You wear it like a shirt under your dress." "I do," Nadesh said. "And I copy." "Then you eat," the woman said, not smiling and smiling all the same. They ate. They rested in the way people rest in a place that might become home. They listened for paddle sounds. When the sun rose and climbed and fell and the paddle sounds did not come, they listened harder, their listening becoming the work of the day. At dusk, in the long quiet that follows the bird's loudest hour, a skiff nose eased into view. Jules crouched in it like a thought a man hasn't finished thinking and feels ashamed of. He saw the smoke and smelled the fish and made a shape with his mouth that might have been a word in another language. Recognition, maybe, that the world was bigger than his books had allowed. Nadej stepped forward into the open because hiding would not fit the rest of the day. "You can go back," she said. She kept her voice quiet, the way one speaks to a nervous animal and to a man who carries guns in his noises. "You can tell the parish, my people slipped the leash and the river bit your hand and you learned a lesson about water. You can leave that lesson in your mouth where it will do you good. Or you can come farther and be swallowed by something older than you." He stared, astonished at the audacity of the offer. Habits are bones. His made him laugh one short, incredulous bark. He shoved his pole into the mud and pushed toward her because a challenge smells to a certain kind of man like meat. She did not look down at the water. She did not look up at the sky. She kept her eyes on his and thought of the catechism because the catechism was a tool here too. What is your duty? To resist evil and love good. What is good? A life with breath and bread and a place to lay a body down where it won't be counted in someone else's ledger. The word steadied her hands on the pole. He cut through the hyacinth hard. The skiff took insult and translated it into lurch. He corrected and the boat answered with a different flavor of opposition. He reached the channel's pinch point where knees pointed at each other like fingers accusing. He chose to go between them because he had always been a between man, between money owed and money collected, between law and the way law was used. He missed the white stone by 3 inches and hit the brown one square. The skiff stopped as if a hand had pressed its chest. Jules flung forward and caught the gunwale with both hands. The hyacinth under his boots said yes and meant no. He kicked, floundered, found purchase, almost stood the boat back under him on strength alone. The old one rose. Its back was a hill. It did not lunge. It existed with the confident dignity of a thing that knows all the stories end with its silence. Jules froze. His breath cut into the syllables of his own name. "Go back," Nadesh said again softly. She was not bargaining. She was offering him a way to live in a world where he might one day be worth the breath it took to say his name without bitterness. He heard the offer. She saw him hear it. He could not pick it up. His hands had not learned the shape of that weight. He shoved with the pole and struck the old one's back with accident and intent in equal parts. The old one slid forward, slow as judgment. The skiff tilted and let water in as if it had been meaning to all along. He fought water with anger and found it to be the wrong tool. She did not clap. She did not turn away. She watched a man wrestle with a lesson his life had postponed so many times it had grown heavy. The old one disappeared again without harm, because harm was not a word that fit.
Jules made the bank, coughing out a laugh that had broken itself. He sat on the mud, hat gone, shirt torn, dignity puddled. The machete woman stood above him with her blade pointed toward the ground in a courtesy that was also warning. "You can tell a story," she said almost kindly. "Make it a good one, so we don't have to hear it twice." He looked from her blade to Nadej, to the baby on the woman's hip, which was the truest threat in the clearing. Proof that the world planned to continue with or without his permission. He nodded once. He stood, slow and careful, as if standing were a language he was relearning. He got into his skiff as if it were someone else's and pushed away as if he trusted orders from voices he could not hear. Nadezh did not follow. She put her hand on the Whitestone's cousin so she would remember the exact chill of a morning when the shape of the day bent toward the possible. She felt the water, through the rock, through her palm. She felt its patience the way people feel the sun on their backs through cotton. He left. Days passed. He did not send dogs. He did not send law. Perhaps he had told the story well enough that men who might have come to look for sport decided to go hunting somewhere else. Perhaps he sat in the big house and discovered silence and did not like the taste of it and left one night for New Orleans with his hat pulled low. Perhaps he went to the parish office and tried to explain a letter he had signed and a transfer he could not finish and found that paper had teeth too, and that those teeth were busy. What Nadezh knew was this. The fields stood up and bent on their own time on that shore. Smoke went up whenever someone needed to say, "We are here," without words. And at night, in a place where the water had learned her name, she taught letters to anyone whose fingers wanted to learn the shape of asking and answering. She taught Isaiah first, because he asked best. He bent over the page with his tongue touching his lip and made an eye that looked too much like a fence. "That jail your letter," she said. "Make it a road." He did. She taught Noemi how to wear two hands in one again, her own and Jules, until they became a third hand neither would recognize as stolen. She taught Toussaint to copy the parish stamp so clean the paper blushed at the feel of it. When he coughed, she waited and then went on, because illness was a teacher too. In the second week, a woman arrived from downriver with a bag of tools that looked like relics and a baby with hair like a storm. She had been 3 months hidden under floors on boats whose captains loved coin more than they loved rules. The machete woman did not ask her name. Names had uses, but they were a different kind of tool here. Nadezh taught her the letters for her child's nickname so she could sew them into cloth in a thread only the two of them could see. By the third week, Baptiste had built a scaffold for drying fish that made the clearing smell like the sea, although no sea had touched their lives. Clara put up a kettle that tasted more of spice than of want. Men from the next bend, who had watched first and judged second, came and bartered help for roof patch and for the copying of a letter that would make a deputy look in the wrong direction when he came idling by in a skiff with nothing better to do than bother people who were busy. Sitting by the fire one night, the baby asleep with its hand open the way the dead sometimes lay their hands, Nadezh let the catechism pace with the frogs. Who made you? The same hands that knotted the rope and braided the hyacinth's lie into a truth you could cross. Why were you made? To learn how to live under the sky's big, indifferent kindness and make community out of its shadow. What must you do? Keep moving, keep teaching, keep the bridges narrow enough that only the ones meant to cross will try. She heard a splash then, and stood without hurry. It was not the splash of a man. It was not even the splash of a thing with hunger. It was the splash of a stick falling because someone testing the edge wanted to know who else lived here. She waited. A face appeared in the dark. Not white, not carrying stamps. A young man with shoulders that had worked for someone else the day before and would work for himself tomorrow. He saw her. She saw him. She lifted a hand. He lifted his. He came into the circle a step. She stepped back to make space for one more in the day's arithmetic. The maroons widened themselves by one. Months later, on a morning that felt like forgiveness without anyone speaking the word, Nadezh walked to the edge of the water and found the white stone had shifted in a storm. She put her foot where it used to be and found nothing, which is its own kind of instruction. She put her foot where the water whispered, and there it was again, patient in a new place, ready to tie off a boat or a life. She laughed under her breath, the sound no one had heard from her mouth much in the old place.
It felt like remembering a song someone had almost taught her once. News traveled by its own routes. When news of Hobart's accident brushed past like a heron's wing in the parish, the way men said accident when they were tired of numbers they couldn't add, people nodded and took it as warning or as weather according to their nature. News of the Delisloe place needing a new overseer came and found no takers with backs unscarred, which is the only kind of back a man in that trade wanted. News of a woman downriver teaching letters like psalms sifted through churches and kitchens and the darker corner of a mercantile where a clerk looked away at the right time. Some men who might have stopped that news did not, because nothing had come of their stamp the last time they tried. The water went on. It took logs respectfully and trash rudely and fish tenderly and sometimes men with humility it did not narrate. Nadege did not ask it to love her. She loved it because it made room when room was what she needed and because it would not lie, even when people did. She learned its smell before rain and the pitch of its laugh when wind came wrong. She learned where babies could be shown their reflection without becoming ghost stories. One evening, at the edge of a storm that carried scent from places they would never see, a skiff touched the bank and a figure climbed out who moved like memory. Jules, older by a long season and smaller in a way that had nothing to do with bone. He carried no pole. He carried something like surrender in a bag over his shoulder. The machete woman met him. "You forget your lessons?" she asked without heat. "I remembered some," he said, and his voice had the softness of a man after illness. He looked at Nadege and could not, apparently, make his face form the scorn he once worn like a cloak. He said, "The house is not mine now. Paper ate it." He smiled, the crooked smile of a man who has finally met a system older and meaner than his own and survived to joke about it without biting anyone on the way. "You could have left us bread instead of taking it," Clara said. "Earlier." "I could have," he said. The admission sounded like an oar settling into the bottom of a boat, inevitable once done, impossible ahead of time. "I didn't. I won't ask a story I'm not in anymore to make room for me." He set the bag down. "There are papers in there. Names written where names weren't. A list of families sold and where to. Not all. Enough to be a road back for someone. I had them because..." He did not finish, perhaps because there was no tidy way to say that power keeps souvenirs. "I don't need them now." Nadege did not reach for the bag. "Why bring them here?"
"Because the river told me to," he said. And then, embarrassed by having said a sentence that sounded like a woman's, he lifted his hands in a helpless gesture. "Because the last time I went against it, it gave me a sermon I still taste. Because I don't know where else the word should rest." She nodded once. She lifted the bag and set it down behind her without looking inside. There would be time, and paper did not rot as fast in oilcloth if you treated it like you meant for it to last. He turned to go. The machete woman did not stop him. The baby, now a toddler, ran to the white stone and put both hands on it, laughing at how cool it felt. Jules flinched at the laughter like a man who had grown used to silence. He got in his skiff and pushed away with a borrowed pole someone laid across his lap without comment. "Do we forgive him?" Isaiah asked that night, practical as a boy who has learned the shape of the real world and still expects to live in it. "We put him down," Nadege said. "Not like a dog, like a sack we were carrying because someone told us we had to. We set it by the road and kept walking. He can pick it up or he can leave it there. It don't belong to us anymore." Isaiah considered. "Then we forgive ourselves," he said. He was right. That season turned, then another. Children learned to shape letters that looked like doors. Women laughed a laugh that did not need to be quiet to be safe. Men woke in the night to listen for paddle sounds and heard only frogs arguing theology.
The old ones sang, and the young ones grew too bold sometimes, and a person drew a line in the water with a pole and said, "Not here," and meant it, and the water respected the line out of habit, if not out of fear. Nadege kept her rope coiled and her papers dry, and her patience a tool she sharpened with salt. When someone asked her what she had done, how she and hers had made a path through the teeth, she said, "We listened." When they asked what they should do, she said, "Learn the difference between a log and a back. Learn where the white stones live under the surface. Learn which of your habits are bones and which you can break without blood." When she lay down at night, she counted not cane stalks, but breaths. When she rose, she braided palmetto fronds for the joy of the evenness in them. She wrote the names from the bag in a new book with a spine Baptiste had glued and cords she had spun. And she left spaces after each name big enough to hold a direction back. Some spaces filled, some did not. The open spaces were their own kind of dignity. They said, "We tried," and trying is not nothing. On the first anniversary of the day the water explained itself to Hobart and tried to explain itself to Jules, Nadege walked with Isaiah and Toussaint to the bend. She did not take flowers. She took a scrap of paper. She read the catechism to the knee-high congregation of knees and frogs and dragonflies. She changed the answers where she needed to. Who made you? The river and the sky and the hands of people who love you. Why were you made? To be free. What must you do? Keep learning, keep choosing, keep making ropes into roads. She folded the paper and tucked it under a piece of bark at the base of a cypress, who had listened without interrupting. On their way back, Toussaint stopped and put a hand to his chest, then lowered it and shook his head with a small smile that looked like acceptance. Air. I am air. I go where I want. He went as far as the clearing and lay down, and when his breath decided to sleep, they let it. They laid him out with the tender competence of people who have done that work before. They set stones. They told stories about the way he could hear a boat by the frog's silence. They promised him they would listen that way now that he was talking to them from under moss. When the moon rose, the water shone with the light of 1,000 coins. Nadege did not wish on them. She counted them and learned their pattern. She lay back on the ground and let the earth hold her. And for the first time in a life that had started with someone else's counting, she felt uncounted in the best sense. Incalculable, a number that had broken out of columns and gone walking into the woods to teach. She dreamed of letters and ropes. She dreamed of children's hands learning the shape of their own names, and then of names no one had written for them yet. She dreamed of dirt under fingernails, which is the most honest kind of jewel. She dreamed of hyacinth lying and the truth of knee roots under it, which is the best kind of truth, the kind that can hold boats and plans and the weight of a choice. In the morning, she rose before anyone else and went to the water. She thanked it in the language it liked. Quiet. She dipped her fingers. She didn't ask for anything but the continued possibility of paths. It gave her a fish's ripple in answer, which is yes, if you've lived long enough to take yes where you find it.
When people from elsewhere came, people sifted by rumor and hurt and the ordinary longing to stand somewhere that lets a person start over, she did not recite the story of what had happened. She gave them cups. She made them repeat the names of the trees so they would not be lost when they walked in the dark. She showed them where the white stones rested under the skin of the bayou and taught them how to feel for them with their feet. She opened the book of names and found a space where theirs could grow a root. And at the end of the day, when the frogs tuned their instruments, she set her rope down in a shape that said welcome just as well as any word. The cane did not miss her. It went on being itself somewhere else, tall and sweet and treacherous. That was all right. She did not miss it either. If she passed a field on some errand that took her farther than she meant to go, and the wind brought her the smell of boiling, she breathed out slow and remembered the hands she had boiled with, and the memory did not bite her anymore. It was like a scar that told an old story and then let the new one speak. On a day when clouds sawed the sun into manageable pieces, she sat with the book of names and found in its pages, pasted near the back, a bit of paper from the bag Jules had brought. It had the old catechism's type on one side, and on the other, a handwriting she didn't recognize at first because it was neater than a planter's and yet carried some of the same leaning pride. The note was brief. If there is a road back for anyone, it is because you made one where there was just water. No signature, no stamp. She smiled and put the paper back, not to save it, but to keep the pleasure of finding it again someday when time made her another gift of surprise. When storms came, as they do, she tied the boats high and trusted the knots she had taught to hold, even if her hands weren't on them. When drought came, as it does, she found deeper channels with a pole and taught the children how to hear where a current hides under a surface that pretends it sleep. When men with badges came, as they will, she met them with tea and the slow talk of weather and names, and they left with copies of letters that asked them to look somewhere else for trouble they could put into their reports. At last, when she lay on her mat old enough to have the right to be tired in public, the machete woman's baby grown and leaning over her with a face that had learned all the news of this place, Nadege put her hand on the white stone she kept by her bed, and feeling its coolness with the last of her fingertips' certainty, laughed again under her breath. "Here," she said to no one, and then to everyone. "Here." The water answered with a small sound against the bank. It had work to do, and so did those who would come after. The book of names lay open on the table with a page half filled and a space where someone else's road would begin tomorrow in letters careful and brave. The rope hung from its peg, ready for whatever task made it a tool of living.